co-counsel, Chen-Yu Lee, and Delgado, and Evan Suspansky. It is our privilege to be here today. I want to give you a very quick synopsis of what the case is. Let me go with this one. The case itself is relatively simple. It's a wrongful foreclosure case. But the posture is a little bit unique. For one, Wells Fargo, they've already admitted liability. The judge is going to tell you that. In most cases, you'll hear there's really two questions. One is the party liable? And if they are liable, how much of an injury did they cause? In this situation, the liability, the fact that Wells Fargo wrongfully foreclosed on my client's home has been established. That's not a question up for debate. That is the law, and the judge will tell you that. So the only question involving Wells Fargo is, how bad has my client been? That's it. As far as PNC is concerned, it's a little bit different because they are contesting liability. And we have two fundamental claims against PNC. One is for wrongful foreclosure, and the other is for what's called promissory estoppel, which is a fancy legal way of saying breaking a promise. Breaking something that you told someone you would do. The wrongful foreclosure is also relatively simple. You're going to hear a lot about it, but the core issue is simple. You're going to hear about two ways PNC wrongfully foreclosed on the base property. First, they were required to provide notice before they foreclosed on their property. You'll hear that at the point in time when they foreclosed, I was her attorney. And I had told PNC that any and all of the correspondence regarding her property, regarding her loan, regarding their dispute, has to go to me. They did not send notice. On top of that, they didn't even send her notice. But I was her shield. You'll hear about why she hired me. And the fact that any and all notices were supposed to come to me didn't happen. That alone is grounds for wrongful foreclosure. But I'll take it a step further. Once we found out, you'll hear from Faye that once we learned about this wrongful foreclosure, we looked into it and we said, you guys foreclosed on behalf of Wells Fargo. Yes, you guys foreclosed on behalf of Wells Fargo. And we sued them and we said, Wells Fargo had no interest. Wells Fargo wasn't able to foreclose on this property. We didn't see the response. Yeah, we could. We're Wells Fargo's agent. We can foreclose on it. Of course we can. Everything was done properly. And in fact, Wells Fargo came in under oath and they said the same thing. They said, yeah, the foreclosure was proper. Everything was done according to law. PNC is our agent. They properly foreclosed on their property in our name. They had the authority to do so. What are you talking about, Faye? You're crazy. About a year later, Wells Fargo comes back, tries to wiggle out her lawsuit, and they provide another affidavit under oath. And they say, you know what? We looked into the situation further. Yes, it took your attorney 15 minutes to figure out that we had no interest in. Guess what? You're right. We foreclosed, PNC foreclosed on this property without our knowledge, authority, or consent. They never should have foreclosed in our name. If we had known that a foreclosure was happening, we would have stopped it. They came back and they admitted the foreclosure was improper and it was done properly under their name. That is wrongful foreclosure number two. Any one of those, the lack of notice, the foreclosure in the wrong entity's name, either of those are enough. We have both in this case. It's rare to have a situation like this. As far as the breaking the promissory estoppel claim, there are numerous promises that PNC broke. We constantly told her to do one thing and she followed and wouldn't follow. But I'm just going to highlight the most egregious. At one point in time, when Ms. Zong was having a dispute with PNC, they told her. And the dispute arose because they raised her mortgage payments from $2,700 to $5,500 a month. They came back and they told her, you know what, we're going to resolve this going forward. You're going to pay $3,800 a month. They sent her a coupon saying, these are your new payments. She mailed off those checks. PNC came back later and said, we never had an agreement. We never promised you anything. And this is the egregious part. Once we sued PNC, we said, you guys agreed to accept the $3,800. And the response, no, we didn't. We asked them, give us any documents you have about this case. The response, here's a whole bunch of documents. No sign of any coupon book, no sign of any agreement. We go through the phone logs, we don't see anything there. And what did Ms. Zong do? She comes back and she says, I have a copy. I had the stuff you sent me. PNC said, what? And they changed their position. And then they come back and they say, oh, all right then. Yeah, we sent you that, but it's not valid for a whole bunch of other reasons. And we'll get into those. But they promised her something, she did it. They foreclosed on her property improperly. And then when we questioned them about it, they denied it until we showed them proof. This has been a long journey. It started in 2010. This lawsuit started in 2012. It's been a long path to get here. Provide a little bit more context of what happened and how we got here. You're going to hear testimony about how Faye moved to the United States from China in the 1990s and how she wanted to build a better life for her son. She had a vision, she had a dream, and so she moved to the United States. And you'll hear about how she worked hard and how she started with small renovations, and small little construction projects. And now she built herself up. And now she made fancier and nicer projects until she got in the position where she was building houses. She ended up building roughly 2 houses a year. They were high-end custom homes. She was a businesswoman. She also used the fact that she was from China to bring and import materials, to import builders' items. She was successful. She did this for a number of years, building homes for other people, making their visions come to light. And you're going to hear that in the back of her mind. She always thought to herself, one day I'm going to do this for myself too. One day I'm going to have my own vision. And when I build my house, it's going to have this. It's going to have this chandelier. It's going to have this hand-carved column. It's going to have this beautiful mosaic. It's going to have this beautiful stone that I've only seen in one place in the rare part of China. She's always thinking about this in the back of her mind. And one day she makes that dream come true. And she builds her dream house. And she's at the top of her game. And she's happy. And it's a place where her and her family visit with lots of happy memories. And this is back in 2004. And it was a high-end home. It was custom. It was a sight to behold. More importantly, it was special to her. It was her blood, sweat, and tears. At the time, and this is back in 2004, she bought it for $860,000. It was a nice house. After that, she made her mortgage payments. She had no issues. 6 years, every single payment, always on time, not a single late payment, not a single issue. One thing you're going to hear about is how diligent she has been as a business person, as an individual. It's how she's always been. She tries to do right, and in this situation, you'll hear that she did do right. So in 2010, she doesn't pay her taxes on time. And PNC tells her, we're going to pay the taxes for you. And Big calls PNC and says, well, let me reimburse you. And they say, no, we're gonna add it to your loan. She says, okay, fine. This was in March of 2010. Come to October of 2010, she gets a letter saying, yes, your previous payments were $2,700 a month. But now you have to pay us $5,500. Her tax payment was roughly $10,000. And so she's confused. Does it make sense? How do we go from 2,700 to 5,500? We're talking about a $10,000 tax payment. How does this mathematically add up? Doesn't make sense to her. She pulls in her husband. She pulls in her son. They try to figure out, what's going on? How did they get this number? And she'll tell you that the day after she got this, she called PNC. Like, you didn't toss it in a drawer. As soon as she gets this, she says, what is this? The following day, she calls, she asks. And what's PNC's response? They don't have a response. They don't know. And you're going to hear about how they pass her back and forth. And how representative tells her, you know what? Just keep making the payments you've been making for the last 6 years, and we're going to look into the matter. That's what they tell her. That's what she does. This is promise number 1. That's in October. And then she does that for November. On November, and you're going to see these call logs. And you will experience the frustration and the stress of getting these letters after letters that contradict themselves, that don't make sense. Things talking about shorting an analysis, shorting your escrow. You're going to hear someone who says, well, what does that mean? She calls the person or the company that's demanding her to pay all this money, and she asks why, and they cannot answer her. No one can answer her. They bounce her back and forth. They put her on hold, are rude to her. They make her wait on hold for an hour, and then they hang up on her. Next month, November, she does what they told her to do. They send her more letters. They say, you have to pay $5,500. She calls in the next day. She's like, what is this? Can you help me? No one can help her. This goes on time and time again until we get to January. So November, December, and January. January, after calling and being bounced back and forth with countless people, she finally gets a breath of fresh air. She talks to someone who seems like she genuinely wants to help. And instead of passing her off, says, let me look into this. This doesn't make sense. It sounds unreasonable. That's what she says. You're going to hear Faye talk about that. She said, this is unreasonable. After spending a long time speaking with her, they come back, the PNC representative, and she tells her, you know what? I see what happened here. We're going to fix it. Faye says, how? He said, you're going to start paying $3,800 a month. He says, this has been over. And she doesn't say this, but you'll hear her talk about this. This has been a stressful ordeal. She's gotten nowhere. She's been jerked around. She's happy to have this resolved. It feels like a bag of bricks had been lifted from her shoulders. She writes down the number, exactly how much her payments are going to be. She gets off the phone. She's happy. The representative told her, we're going to be mailing you a coupon book, and you'll start making your payments starting February 1st of 2011. But they, being diligent, she doesn't wait until February 1st. This phone call happened on January 26th of 2011. The next day, she mails off a payment for the exact amount that they told her to mail. And she's watching her bank account. She sees that it's not cash. She thinks this is weird, this is odd. And as she's waiting, she gets the coupon book in the mail. And she says, well, let me mail another payment. So she does that. She gets the check mailed back to her with a piece of paper. So it does not meet payment guidelines. She doesn't know what this means. What do you mean it doesn't meet payment guidelines? I just spoke with someone, told me this is how we fix it, this is what we're going to do. She turns around. She calls PNC the same day. She gets bounced around, back and forth. She says, this is my, this is what you told me to do. What did a representative say? What are you talking about? What do you mean? We never told you to do this. And you're going to hear from her that every time she called, the very first time when she said, how about I just pay my taxes back? You do always push this hardship application angle, do a hardship, let's do a workout. They always did that. She calls and she says, I've mailed the payment. Why are you sending it back? It says, doesn't meet payment guidelines. Why aren't you accepting it? And they cannot answer. And even worse than that, they say, what are you talking about? They gaslight her. There was no agreement. There was no promise to mail these payments off. Well, she turns around and she mails the payment again. This time she overnights it. She doesn't know what's going on. She can this time get accepted. She does that. It gets returned back to her. She does the same thing one more time. She sends it through her bank. She says, we know they're going to get it. I send it through my bank. They return it back to her, but this time she gets a letter back with it saying, your property is going to foreclosure. That's when she pulls me in. She, again, she's being diligent. She's trying to do what's right. As soon as she sees that, she says, I'm in over my head. We need to take care of this. She hires an attorney. What more can she do? You'll hear that at that point in time, she sends a letter through me. I'm her representative. I'm her agent. And I tell them, hey, any issues with this property, go through me now. And not only that, but you guys said you're going to foreclose on her property. If you guys don't cancel the foreclosure, we're going to sue you. In their response, they sent me a letter saying, oh, okay, we'll cancel the foreclosure. So they cancel it. But then they say, in order for this to go to the proper people, in order for this to get reviewed by the proper committee, Faith has to do a hardship application. She has to submit hardship paperwork. She has to submit a workout plan. All she wants is for them to go along with it. But they keep telling her, you need to do this paperwork, you do this paperwork. And they keep telling her that once you do this, they'll get proper people, and they'll be able to fix this problem. And that's another frustration in and of itself. She gets back in the same situation where they say, submit this paperwork. You submit this paperwork. We're like, we didn't get it. We have fax receipts. But okay, fine. We'll send it to you again. Same thing happens. We didn't get it. Then they come back and say, we want more. We want more. Sure. And all throughout this time, we try to be amicable about it, try to be friendly about it. And all this time, they say they're going to look into it and they're analyzing the situation. They're going to get back to us. Come several months later. And so this initial foreclosure that they decided to withdraw was back in March of 2011. This process where we keep submitting paperwork, it goes on and on for about 7-8 months. And you'll hear that even up until February of 2012, they're asking her, they tell her, you need to submit this insurance plan, or you need to prove that the property has insurance. You need to do this, you need to do that. They have correspondence that they send to her, they send it to me. It's all proper, they have our address. Come in next month, they foreclosed on her property. They didn't send any notice of foreclosure to me. There's no doubt about that. And they didn't send it to her right address. And there's no doubt about that either. You'll hear that from Faye as well. The fact of the matter is, once we instructed them, it had to go through me. That was it. And unless they can come up here and say, well, there's some other sort of document showing that we couldn't submit it to you, they were required to. I was her sword, I was her shield. That's why she hired me. So that if something happens, just like the last time, we can stop it. So once that happens, once Faye finds out that her house, her home, her special project is foreclosed, we end up suing PNC and Wells Fargo. We do some digging and we see that Wells Fargo should not have foreclosed on this property. They didn't have an interest in this property. It wasn't a difficult analysis. We were able to figure that out and we sued them saying, hey, this foreclosure is improper. Wells Fargo didn't have any interest. That's on top of the fact that she didn't get noticed as required by law. PNC's response? No, we have the authority to act on behalf of Wells Fargo. We're their agent. Wells Fargo, they don't answer in time. They come back later and say, let us back into the lawsuit. They submit an affidavit under oath. Yeah, it was our property. We had the interest in it. We foreclosed on it. That's fine. That's okay. They were our agent. Everything was done properly. They has them. It's only about a year later when Wells Fargo came back, tried to wiggle out of the situation again, that they submitted another affidavit where they said, hey, we looked into this further. And guess what? Faye was right. We didn't have an interest. They went past PNC. Now they're sitting at the same table where they went past them saying that PNC had no authority to do this. They weren't our agent. We had no consent. We had no knowledge. They had no authority. And so they confirmed what we said all along. That's the nutshell in terms of the liability. It's relatively simple. Promised one, they told her to keep making payments. When she called, turned around, she did that. They didn't accept them. They manufactured a default. Had she called and had they said, nope, you got to keep doing this, she could have pulled in someone else. We could have written divorce, sued them, stopped them, but they said, nope, keep making your payments. She relied on it. Promise number two, the whole coupon looked fiasco. Turned around, they said, okay, fine, now we've resolved this. Start making these payments. That's what she did. PNC said there was no such agreement. There was no coupon, but what are you talking about until we proved it, until we showed it to them? And promise number three was when they told her, hey, you guys submit this hardship application, we're going to look into it, we're going to figure out what's going on. Instead, they secretly foreclosed on her property. Wrongful foreclosure, foreclosed on the wrong party's name. Wells Fargo should not have foreclosed on it. We told them this, they did it anyways. They didn't provide notice to her, they didn't provide notice to me. It's relatively simple. The problem with this foreclosure and the problem with this situation is that it has crushed my client. And so they took her house, and that's a bad thing. Everyone knows that. But they also destroyed everything that mattered to her by doing so. They destroyed her credit. They talked about how she was a businesswoman. She was building properties. She was importing things. This is all heavily credit based. They turned around, they slashed her credit. They destroyed it. And she's never been able to recover since. As I mentioned before, there's no issue as far as liability for Wells Fargo. It's only how hard or how has this damaged my client. And I'm not sure what they're going to say, but I got a preview for what they told you this morning, which is they're going to stand up here and say with a straight face that Faye was not hurt by this. So what, we sold her home. So what, we foreclosed on it. She wasn't hurt. What you're going to hear later is testimony from all the people around her. We talk about the burden, the depression, the crushing, how this fundamentally changed her as a person. You're going to hear about how she was always a loving mother. She came here to the United States because she wanted to do better for her son. She wanted to do better for her. And after all this happened, after her home that she spent all this time finding, her sanctuary, was taken from her, she tried to shield her family from it. You're going to hear about the fact that she built a special gazebo for her daughter to look like a castle in this custom built house. Her daughter said she wanted a castle, and she said, I'll give you the castle, and she made it for her. And her daughter, who was just about 10 at a time, she's like, I can't tell her this. And so she tries to shield this from her daughter. She tries to shield her family from it, and it becomes such a huge, heavy burden. A lot of you are parents. You know what you do for your children. And you know the sacrifices you make. And so she has to internalize all this pressure, all this force, try to do what's good for her family. In every single one of her relationships, it suffers. You'll hear about the fact that she tries to protect her daughter, but her relationship is strained. You'll hear from some people that, despite how good she thinks she is at hiding this, that something's wrong, you can't. You'll hear about how she used to be very social, how one of her prides and joys was bringing her family into her home. And that was one of her goals in building this place, building her home. It was a safe place, it was a sanctuary, it was a refuge, it was a place with happy memories and aspirations. You'll hear about the fact that she had visions of having her grandkids there. This was her chance to build that generational wealth. This was her chance to do and live the American dream. Instead, they took that from her. And they turned around, and not only did they put her in a hole, but they put the shackles on her. They destroyed her credit so that she could never get out of this hole. Here we have Faye, who was trying to do so good for her children and give them everything she could. And you'll hear about when she took her daughter shopping back to school and had her waiting in line because her daughter wants a new dress. And when she gets up to pay for it, her card is declined. And the embarrassment she felt and how she had to leave and how her daughter was embarrassed and how she couldn't hide that and how it absolutely crushed her. We'll hear about how she went from being an independent woman, a business owner, someone who developed something along the lines of 20 different properties. We're talking about high-end properties. These are billion-dollar properties she was building. What does she do now? Whatever job she can. Right now, she's doing alterations. She came here with a dream, and she was achieving that dream. She was at the top of their game. PNC came, and Wells Fargo foreclosed on it with PNC and took that. And not only did they take her home, they took everything that came with that home. One of the things that also happened was her relationship with her friends, her family, her parents. You're going to hear about the fact that before all this, her family would come to her house often. She couldn't explain how she lost this house. She didn't do anything wrong. She's done everything right. She did everything she was supposed to, and it was taken. She used to call her parents every other day. She stopped calling them. She couldn't explain to them what happened. They couldn't understand. She just started avoiding them. She went into a shell. She built her house. One of the reasons why she picked the place she picked was because it hit all the things she wanted. It was in a special location that was next to the Chattahoochee River, special views and nature and all these other things that you'll hear about that she loved. She wanted to be close to her sister. She built a home that was 2 miles from her sister, so that she could see her every day. You'll hear about how she had a close relationship with her sister and with her sister's daughter. After all this happened, she went into a shell. You'll hear about the fact that she didn't see her sister for about 7 years. She was too embarrassed. She was depressed. She couldn't face them. You'll hear about the fact that she didn't know how to explain this to her friends. She didn't know what to tell them. She used to have these nice gatherings at her home. She used to have elaborate gatherings, and she was prideful. And she was proud of what she did. And once they took that from her, she couldn't face that. You're going to probably hear from her sister that her sister tried to help her, tried to have her come work with her, but she just couldn't. The stress, the grief, the anxiety, and what makes the thing sting the worst is the injustice that goes along with it. It's one thing to say, you know what, I'm going to gamble my house and I lose it. Okay, I can accept that consequence. It's another thing to say, hey, I did everything right. I did what they told me to do. I even hired an attorney. And they still took it. And when we told them they did this wrong, you guys are in the wrong, when we sued them, they sat back. And instead of fixing things, they waited. And they sold their property to someone else. They transferred it to someone else to make sure you can never get it back. We told them about these problems. They got served with a lawsuit. They learned about this lawsuit. Instead, they decided to actually transfer it out of their name. Like, we're going to wash your hands so she'll never get it back. She's been in this journey for 12 years. And you're going to hear that the reason why she's here today is because she wants justice. She wants justice for herself. And she wants justice for everyone else to make sure this never happens to anyone else. One of the reasons she moved here was because she wanted to leave China. She wanted to make sure that, you know, those things that happen in China, that they don't happen here. But here, her property just got taken with her. And she's been on this path for 12 years. There's been no accountability. There's been no justice. We're finally here so that you guys can administer justice. So you guys can fix how she's been wrong. How you can say that, you know, we can't give you these 12 years that you've lost, but we can make you whole. We can try to make this as right as we can make it. I'm not exactly sure what the defendants are going to say. I do know that they're going to try to toss anything in the wall that can stick. Probably going to say she wasn't hurt. They're probably going to say, you know, she had other business disputes, she had other business dealings. It's all true. She had a lot of business disputes. I say a lot, I mean two, for running 3 corporations that were doing good business. They're probably going to say, you know what? She didn't even care about the house because when it was foreclosed on, she was living in Alpharetta, not in Dunwoody where the house is built. She was there because she was trying to give her daughter the opportunity to go to art school. She's trying to make another sacrifice and do what's best for her girl. And perhaps once previously, I can guarantee you maybe not, but you're gonna get up there and say, she wasn't hurt. Yes, we took her house, we took her blood and sweat and tears, we took her aspirations, and we did it improperly, but she wasn't hurt. I can't imagine that it'd be so foolish to say such a thing, but I think they will. At this point, I'm gonna yield the floor to the other side. They're gonna turn around and they're gonna say their position in this. They're gonna try to justify why my client wasn't hurt. Why taking her custom built house that she spent almost $900,000 to build, why that could not have harmed her. Why slashing her credit that was instrumental for this businesswoman who managed to come halfway across the world and build something for herself didn't matter. Why preventing her from buying school clothes for her daughter, why that doesn't hurt her. I'm not sure what else you're going to say, but that's what I think you're going to say. And after that, we are going to bring our witnesses. We're going to talk about how we got to where we are. You also hear the story from Faye so that you can hear how we got to where we are and the impact this has happened to her. I understand that no one wants to be here. I don't want to be here. I know she doesn't want to be here. But this has been a long time coming. And it's important. And it's her chance, it's your chance to right what has been wrong. So I do appreciate you all being here today. So thank you.
An opening on behalf of PNC.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My job as an attorney representing PNC is to tell you what I expect the evidence to be. Before I do that, I do want to introduce for you my colleagues who are here, Fair Johnson and Kim Stanwer. Stanwer is a paralegal and will help me show you what documents. I'll send them with Gary Deutsch, who's an attorney in the state. As I say, my job is to try to tell you the evidence. Mr. Hadari is just commenting that he's not sure what I'm going to say. Well, I want to tell you what I expect the evidence to be. I won't have an opportunity to speak to you again directly into a closing argument. I know that jurors always take their responsibilities as jurors very seriously, and you all made that clear this afternoon, that was your intention, and I thank you for that in advance. The evidence is going to tell a very different story than Mr. Hadari just told you. And so I think that when you get the case and retire to the jury room to discuss the case for the first time, you'll conclude that foreclosure wasn't wrongful and that PNC didn't make any promises to Ms. Zong that she relied on or that hurt her. So why wasn't the foreclosure wrongful? I mean, in many respects, the story that you're going to hear from the evidence is a straightforward story of somebody who was not able to make the mortgage payments, as a result lost her house. The foreclosure sale that occurred in January of 2012, and by that time, March of 2012. And by that time, Ms. Zong had not made a mortgage payment since November of 2010. So well more than a year. And Mr. Hadari suggested to you that there was no notice by PNC that a foreclosure was going to happen. You're going to hear the evidence on that, and you'll be able to conclude yourself. And I fully expect that you're going to see that there was a lot of notice foreclosure because there was a lot of correspondence and there was a lot of communication. And a lot of the letters said, this is your loan is an active foreclosure. This is headed toward foreclosure. So in many respects, it's a typical foreclosure case because we've got a borrower who owned a house, wasn't able to make the payments, and therefore foreclosure resulted. But there are some unusual aspects to it. And one unusual aspect is that Ms. Zong was a real estate professional who was in the business of building houses and selling houses. And for a while, had done very well with that. She bought the house actually from her company. The company was called Sylvanus. So you'll be hearing about her real estate company, Sylvanus. Sylvanus bought this property in July of 2004. In 2003. And then Ms. Zong bought the property from her company for $1 in July of 2004. And then a month after that, got the mortgage loan that's at issue. And she was actually able to get $100,000 in cash out of that loan, which she presumably used for her own purposes and was entirely her right to use the money however she wished. And for several years thereafter, 2004, 5, 6, etc., she did fine and she was making the payments. Now, one aspect of the case that you're going to be hearing more detail about is uh, the amounts that she needed to pay. Of course, she had to pay the loan back, which meant she had to pay principal and interest on the loan. But she also had to pay real estate taxes and she had to pay to insure the property. Those of you who have owned a house and had mortgage loans know that often the responsibility for paying taxes and insurance is part of your mortgage payment. So you pay not only the principal and interest on your loan, but also taxes and insurance. And then the lender takes the money and goes ahead and pays the taxes for you. The reason banks like PNC and Wells Fargo do it that way is because they want to make sure that the taxes get paid and that the property is insured so that they can protect their collateral. So in this instance, Ms. Zong, when she got the loan, probably because she was a real estate professional and was doing well, the loan was set up so that she was to pay her taxes and her insurance directly. But the document that she signed, security deed that ultimately gave the right to foreclose, made clear that if you don't pay your taxes, you don't pay your insurance, we'll pay them for you and make an interest-free loan to cover those, but you'll have to pay them back. And at that point, we'll set up an escrow account so that your monthly payment will increase to cover those taxes and insurance. So as I say, the loan, she did fine because the economy was fine and her business was fine. But in 2009, as a lot of us remember, the economy was not fine. And it had a very bad effect on Ms. Zong and her business. You're going to see her tax return for 2009, and that shows that in 2009, Ms. Zong made about $8,000. So business was tough, and it wasn't easy for her to make her tax payments, and she wasn't able to. So in early 2010, PNC sent her a letter and said, hey, we have noticed that you haven't paid your taxes, so please pay your taxes. There was a comment about wanting to reimburse or something. You're going to see a letter where she was asked, go ahead and please pay your taxes. If you don't within 30 days, then we're going to advance the money and we're going to set up an escrow account for you to pay us back. So that's what happened. She didn't make that tax payment. I'm sure she wasn't able to make the tax payment. So PNC advanced that money for her. So you now move forward a few months later, August 2010, and you'll be seeing these documents. At that point, PNC does an escrow analysis. What that means is that it determines how much she's going to have to pay to reimburse PNC for the 2009 taxes that it paid. Also to pay PNC for the 2010 taxes, which it's going to have to pay in just a couple of months, and to pay in advance for 2011. So it's a lot. It is a lot of tax, and it does result in a very substantial increase in her payment. But this is all communicated to Ms. Zong. She's given the escrow analysis that shows us what your payment is going to be, and it's going to start in November of 2010. Okay, so her payment goes up dramatically that month, November of 2010. But she only pays the amount that she had been paying. She only pays the principal and interest that she had been paying. So she sends that in, PNC gets it and says, okay, we'll apply this to principal and interest, but you still owe us the escrow. So please send us, it was around $2,500, $2,700, something like that. Ms. Zong does not do that. Okay, so the next month rolls around and she makes another payment only in the principal and interest amount, doesn't pay the escrow. So this time PNC says, okay, you can't make partial payments. So please send us the rest of the money that you owe. And if you don't, then we're going to apply it to the taxes that we've already paid. So she doesn't send that payment, that additional payment either. The next month, the same thing happens again. So we're in January, and at this point, she's made these two small payments, which PNC has applied to the escrow shortage. And what that means is she has not made her December and her January payment. So at that point, there's a lot of correspondence, and there are phone calls, and you're going to be seeing the evidence on this. And the correspondence is all to the effect, you're behind a couple of payments, you've missed payments, you need to make these payments. She calls toward the end of January, and so going back to 2011, and she indicates that she's not able to make the larger payments. So PNC at that point says, okay, what we'll do is, instead of charging you as much as we were for the escrow, for the taxes that we've advanced and will be advancing for you, instead of having you pay us that back over 12 months, we'll have you pay it back over 5 years. And again, this is an interest-free loan. PNC doesn't have to do this, but wants to work with her. And that has the effect of reducing her monthly payment from about $5,500 to about $3,800, round numbers. So this seems like a positive, and it's true that Ms. Zong tries to send in $3,800. But PNC responds, that's not enough because you still owe December and January. You have to send us in 3 payments. And from that point forward, there's a lot of communication between Ms. Zong and PNC. And Ms. Zong does attempt to make a couple of these smaller payments, but she never pays the full amount that's due. So PNC does start a foreclosure, notifies her. We're referring this to foreclosure. That's what happens next. And at that point, there were further discussions. And yes, Mr. Hederi does get involved at that point, and PNC cancels the foreclosure sale. So there's a lot of suggestion in Mr. Hederi's comments that there was some desire to hurt Ms. Zong, or the evidence is not going to show you that at all. PNC wanted to work with its customer. The customer Ms. Zong seemed to be suggesting that she might be able to reinstate the loan. So, okay, let's take some time. Let's try to figure out a way to work this out. And you're going to see all this correspondence where Ms. Zong describes for PNC the nature of her hardship, why it is that she's having a difficult time because her business is struggling and not doing nearly as well as it had been. So PNC works with her and asks for documents and says, you might be able to modify your loan. Let's see what we can work out. The problem was her income was simply not enough to do that. But it wasn't for lack of trying on PNC's part. For many months, there was a lot of correspondence and a lot of effort in this regard. Unfortunately, Ms. Zong wasn't just dealing with her mortgage payment to PNC on this particular property. Her business was not only struggling, but it was under attack. Not by PNC, not by Wells Fargo, and not illegitimately, but by BB&T. BB&T was the bank that was the principal lender to her company, Sylvanus. So you're going to hear about the lawsuit that Ms. Zong was dealing with at this very time in 2011, brought by BB&T. BB&T was saying, hey, we lent you money. We're going to have to foreclose on these properties that you were trying to develop. So BB&T says foreclosures, accepted foreclosures, covers that property, and then says, but we might need to recover the money directly from you too. You owe more than $1 million. We may have to sue you to recover that money. So that lawsuit was BB&T against Sylvanus, Ms. Zong's company, and also Ms. Zong personally, because Ms. Zong had guaranteed that debt. Ms. Zong had said, I promise to pay back my company's debt. It's not able to pay it back. I bring that up only to point out that these were difficult years for Ms. Zong. I don't doubt that these were difficult years. But your decision today in this case is not to determine anything about delivering justice on a broad scale. It's to determine whether my client, PNC, did something wrong that caused problems for Ms. Zong. I don't doubt that Ms. Zong was having distress during these years. It wasn't solely because of this mortgage. And in fact, Mr. Hederi did disclose toward the end of his opening statement that Ms. Zong wasn't even living in this property during these months. And in fact, she had made efforts to sell the property not long before all of this transpired. I mean, the financial pressure that she was feeling from her business problems was so significant that that's where she was. So the payments just never, Ms. Zong was just never able to catch up. And any of us who's had a mortgage loan knows how this works. Every month you have to make a payment. So every month you don't make a payment, the problem becomes worse. But the suggestion was that PNC somehow wanted to foreclose on her, wanted to take her property. And that simply wasn't the case. When Ms. Zong stopped trying to work with PNC, stopped sending in information, let's try to work this out. Still several months went by. And it is true that PNC kept sending her letters. Well, we got people you can work with, etc. But she stopped responding. And it seems to me, I think the evidence is going to convince you that by that point she'd given up. I mean, she simply didn't have the financial resources to bring this loan current. She was well aware that the loan was actively in foreclosure and a foreclosure sale happened. Now, Mr. Hidari suggested to you that foreclosure notices were not sent. There's actually an important detail about Georgia law that's very important in this case. The Georgia statute on foreclosure notice says that it's the obligation of a lender such as my client PNC to send notice, and there's requirements in the statute for what that notice is supposed to be. There isn't a requirement in the statute that the borrower, the zon, the homeowner, actually get the notice. You can disagree with that as a matter of Georgia law. You can talk to your legislator about doing something different, but the requirement is that notice be sent. And the evidence is clear that notice was sent. And by the way, I think the reason for that law is that otherwise you'd have all kinds of cases disputing whether the person who got foreclosed actually received notice. So instead, the statute says, no, notice has to be sent, but you don't have to prove that notice was received. You're going to be hearing from the foreclosure attorney who managed the foreclosure, and you're going to see the notices. And you're going to hear his explanation for where he sent them and why he sent them to those places. And the fact of the matter is that PNC provided the addresses to use. One of the addresses, the one that satisfied the statute, was the property address itself. The notice went there. Now, Ms. Zong may say, well, I didn't get it because I wasn't living there, so I couldn't receive notice there. The house was being rented at that point. In fact, I think it was vacant at that point. The evidence will show that. But that's not the point. Now, Mr. Hidari also said, but PNC should have sent something to me. I was a lawyer, so I should have received notices as well. Well, there's an important piece of evidence that you're going to see on this. In March of 2011, PNC said to Ms. Long, if you want other people to be able to speak to us about your loan, you have to fill out this form and tell us who they are and what you're authorizing us to speak to them about. And you'll see it. I mean, it's a form. It looks like a form. It's got 5 boxes that she could check, and she checked one. She said that Mr. Hidari and her husband, partner, were authorized to speak to PNC about the loan details, the payment, hardship, loan modification, stuff like that, which is exactly what PNC did. There was another box that said, change the mailing address, update the contact information. She didn't check that box. She didn't check that box. If she had checked that box, then PNC would have taken that information and said, okay, we're supposed to send the notices someplace else. If Ms. Zong had ever sent a letter saying, you need to start communicating with me at a different address, that would have been different, but that's not the evidence in this case. The evidence in this case is that the only address, well, PNC had a couple of addresses, but the address that was critical was the property address itself. And the evidence is going to show that notice. So after you've heard all the evidence, ladies and gentlemen, I think you'll be able to conclude that Ms. Zong unfortunately was not able to make her payments on this loan. That went on for more than a year. The PNC did work with Ms. Zong, did attempt to try to find a way. PNC did tell her that foreclosure was going to happen. She didn't come current. She didn't reinstate. She didn't fix the problem. So a foreclosure sale happened. And that's an unfortunate fact, but we're all familiar with it. I mean, if banks make mortgage loans, and if you're not able to pay the loan, then you can't stay on the property. It's just an aspect of it. So I think after you've heard all the evidence, you'll conclude that foreclosure happened, but it was not wrongful. And the PNC never made a promise to her that it should somehow be responsible for damages on. And just a couple of other points on that. This is not a breach of contract case, and I don't want to get too technical legally with you, but you know, a contract is typically what you need in order to get a judgment from a jury such as yourselves on a promise. The courts have recognized there's no contract here, so it's something a little bit less than that. Is there some promise the PNC made that PNC should have known Ms. Zong was going to rely on. My understanding of what the promise is that PNC supposedly promised Ms. Zong, if you just make the one payment, that's enough. That's okay. That'll be fine. There's no evidence of that, and you're going to be hearing from a representative of PNC who's very experienced in the mortgage business, working at PNC a long time, is going to take you through all the documents and transactions. And there's simply no way that anybody would have promised that, nor is there any evidence that anybody did promise that. So we think on that claim as well, you're going to conclude that Ms. Zong hasn't proven her case against PNC, and will return a verdict for her. Thank you very much.
And anything on behalf of Wells Fargo, Mr. Howard?
Thank you. All right, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We met this morning. I introduced myself this morning. That seems now like that was about a week ago. And I'm terrible with names, so I'm going to assume some of you guys are terrible with names and reintroduce myself. I'm Dylan Howard. I represent Wells Fargo Bank in this lawsuit. I also want to reintroduce Jordan Oppenheim, my associate, and Mike Johnson, who's here as representative of Wells Fargo. Now, you may have noticed that there are a lot of lawyers in this room, and you may be hearing from a lot of witnesses over the next few days. But the evidence in the case will show that my client, Wells Fargo, had very, very little involvement in this loan or this foreclosure. As a result, I'm going to try and respect your time, respect Judge McAfee's time. I'm going to try and be brief throughout this case. Hopefully, we can get you guys home shortly. And hopefully we can get this lawsuit handled and get you guys back to your jobs and your kids and your regular lives as soon as possible. Now, the one thing that Mr. Haidari and I will probably agree on is that this is a simple case. Ms. Zong had a mortgage loan that was serviced by PNC. The evidence will show that Wells Fargo was not the loan servicer. Wells Fargo was not the trustee of the trust. The evidence will show that Wells Fargo was not responsible for collecting and applying mortgage payments. Wells Fargo never spoke with Ms. Zong about this loan. Wells Fargo was not responsible for hiring foreclosure counsel or mailing foreclosure notices. And the evidence finally will show that Wells Fargo had nothing to do with the credit reporting on the loan and never reported any information about Ms. Zong's loan or the foreclosure of the credit reporting agencies. And there is no dispute about any of those facts. So why is Wells Fargo involved? So as I said, PNC was the servicer of the mortgage loan. They didn't own the mortgage loan, they serviced it. As servicer, they had the authority to prepare and record certain deeds to protect the interest of the trustee of the trust, which in this case specifically included an assignment of security deed they prepared prior to the foreclosure after Ms. Zong had defaulted. In this case, on that assignment of security deed, there was a typo and Wells Fargo was listed in addition to the trust. But there's no dispute that Wells Fargo should not have been listed, and Wells Fargo didn't find out about the foreclosure until afterwards. So that is the reason that Wells Fargo is even here today. Now, plaintiff filed the lawsuit alleging that PNC didn't comply with the agreement to reduce her payments, the alleged agreement. That's the promissory estoppel claim. That claim is not made against Wells Fargo. It has nothing to do with Wells Fargo. You should not award any damages against Wells Fargo with regard to that claim. She also alleged that PNC and Wells Fargo failed to send foreclosure notices to her attorney, and that's really the basis for wrongful foreclosure claim. Based on that, as you heard from Mr. Haidari, the plaintiff is asking for a whole lot of damages, general damages, damages for alleged emotional distress, nominal damages, punitive damages. At the end of the day, at the end of the week, you're going to hear that she's asking for a very, very large sum of money. Now, through most of this case, Mr. Haidari and Mr. Tobin will be arguing back and forth, presenting witnesses back and forth, and those witnesses will be testifying as to what happened between plaintiff and PNC, where foreclosure notices were sent, where they should have been sent. What you will not hear a lot is Wells Fargo being mentioned by the witnesses, or Wells Fargo being mentioned in any of the evidence whatsoever, because the evidence is going to show that Wells Fargo really didn't do anything at all with regard to Ms. Zong or her loan. Now, as Mr. Haidari mentioned, Wells Fargo defaulted, which means they didn't file a timely answer. As a result of the default, they have admitted a few of Ms. Zong's allegations. You don't need to worry about that right now. Judge McAfee at the end of the case is going to instruct you guys on the law, including the legal effect of that default. But that's an aspect of it. That's another reason we're here. Now, as these things go, as trials tend to go, plaintiff will present her side of the case first. And as jurors, as you guys are here being asked to be fair and to determine whether plaintiff is entitled to those damages, I will ask you to do 4 things for me. 1, remember that what's important in this case is the evidence and the facts. Now, things I say are not evidence. The things Mr. Haidari said earlier are not evidence. The things Mr. Tobin just said are not evidence. Lawyers love to argue, we love to talk, I'll admit that as soon as anybody. And we're good at it, but none of the things we say are evidence in this case. You guys are going to make very important decisions based not on the arguments that we present, but based on the evidence. And the evidence in this case boils down to 2 things. 1, statements that the witnesses tell you under oath when they're presenting their official testimony. And 2, documents or exhibits. Documents are going to be presented and they'll have evidence contained in them. And if you compare the argument to the evidence, you look at the evidence, not the argument. Now, for example, Mr. Haidari in his opening said some pretty negative things about Wells Fargo. I'm sure in his closing argument at the end of the week, he's going to say some very negative things about Wells Fargo. But what you guys are tasked with focusing on is the evidence. And I promise you, I promise each and every one of you that the evidence about Wells Fargo's involvement with this loan and the foreclosure are very, very different than how Mr. Haidari is characterized in this affidavit. Now, as I said, the facts matter, and the facts will show that at the time of the foreclosure, Ms. Zong was underwater, which means she owed more on her house. She owed more on the loans associated with her house than the house was worth. The evidence will show that her business, Sylvanas, failed. That is true. It failed months before this foreclosure ever happened. It was closed down months before this foreclosure happened. The evidence is going to show that plaintiff is, Mr. Haidari argued about a lot of credit damages. Wells Fargo and PNC destroyed her life and took away her credit. But the evidence is going to show that that's just not true. Some of the credit, with regard to some of the credit where her credit balances were lowered, she admitted at her deposition that they, or at least could not dispute at her deposition under sworn testimony, that those things were lowered months before the foreclosure. She admitted with regard to some of her store credit cards that she didn't use them because she was worried that they might not work, but she never tried. She admitted at her deposition that she didn't go and buy another house. She didn't apply for a mortgage loan to see if her credit would let her buy a mortgage loan. So when you're looking at the evidence and the facts, you're going to discover that a lot of the terrible things that Mr. Haidari said just are completely untrue and unsupported. Now, 2, I'd ask you to listen carefully to all of this evidence that I'm describing. And you have to determine if Ms. Zong proves that she's entitled to some amount of monetary damage from Wells Fargo. Judge McAfee will tell you that Ms. Zong has the burden of proof on this issue, and frankly, all the issues in the case. If she doesn't prove an amount of damages by a preponderance of the evidence, which means a majority of the evidence, then you should not award damages to plaintiff in this case. 3, you need to listen carefully to the evidence to determine if Ms. Zong proves that Wells Fargo engaged in conduct justifying an award of punitive damages. Now, under Georgia law, again, as Judge McAfee will explain at the end, punitive damages are intended to punish bad actors for actions that show willful misconduct or a conscious indifference to the consequences. And your job is to carefully consider whether you hear any evidence that Wells Fargo did anything wrong at all, much less anything that could be considered willful misconduct that should be punished by punitive damages. 4 is a simple one. I just ask you to keep an open mind until you hear defendant's side of the case. Other than that, I believe you guys, once you have all the facts, the correct result will be clear and obvious. You guys will be fair-minded. You will consider all of the evidence in this case fairly. You will listen to both sides. In the end, you will reach a fair decision on this case. Thank you.
All right, members of the jury, thank you again for your attention and all your time spent already today. We are ready to conclude. And so, as I mentioned, if you would go ahead and plan now that there's going to be a lot of traffic tomorrow, and go ahead and plan that the weather may not be for the best, and make every effort to be here in this jury room ready to go at 9 o'clock so we can stay on track and make sure we are proceeding efficiently. Remember the instructions I've told you. Please don't discuss this case with anyone in the interim before tomorrow, and don't do any research on your own. So at this time, Juror 24 had asked to address the parties without you, so I'll ask Juror 24 to stay behind. The rest of y'all are excused for the day. See you tomorrow morning. All right, feel free to have a seat, Juror 24. Ms. Fortis, our case manager, had brought to my attention when she was giving you the orientation that you had some concerns about your service this week.
3 kids and I have only 1 car. 2 goes to the school, middle school and high school, and the big one comes to the Georgia State. So at first I have to, early in the morning, I have to drop them off, the younger one to the school and the big one to the MARTA station. And then sometimes I have to pick the big one up from the like 3:30 or 4, something like that. So it's gonna be a little bit tight for me, you know. Is there any way that you can let me go or something like that? That would be really helpful for me.
Well, the first question that comes to mind is why we're hearing about this now. Usually when we ask about conflicts or childcare, those are questions we asked on the front end of things.
That's my mistake, and I'm sorry for that. That's my mistake. You know, after a long time, I came this kind of environment, and I didn't understand like the way you guys speaking, and I was nervous a little, so I couldn't answer you properly, and I'm sorry for that. If it's possible, that would be helpful, but it's up to you, whatever you decide.
Well, I'll let the parties in a minute here follow up with if they have any questions, but I think we may have to take it a day at a time. So why don't we start off where you can just tell me for tomorrow, is there something that's preventing you, or are there other accommodations you could make for tomorrow for you to spend the day with us from 9 to 5?
Today, my big sister, she dropped me off. So after I'm done, then I'm gonna call her, then she's gonna pick me up. So I'm not sure how I'm gonna manage everything, you know. Tomorrow, after I go home, then I have to discuss with my spouse and my kids and like my relatives and make the accommodation to come over here and stuff like that.
All right. Any follow-ups from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right. Any from the defendant?
Yes, sir.
All right. So Juror 24 for now, what I am asking you to do is to go home and start making those plans for tomorrow. And if you want to re-raise this concern with us at some point tomorrow, I'll be willing to hear it and listen to it. But I want you to go home today and make every effort and explore everything you can do to be able to join us for this entire week. And I also want you to be able to, we should have provided you with contact information. If for whatever reason you need to let us know something, I'm going to be expecting it by email. But the expectation is you're going to be here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and I'll hear if there's if you haven't been able to make it happen for the rest of the week. I'm willing to hear it again, but we're going to need you here tomorrow. Okay. All right. Is she in the back still? I just hold off on her. All right. Any input from the parties on Juror 24?
No, Your Honor. And the only thing I'd ask is if we're going to excuse her, then if PNC and Wells Fargo would stipulate if we need to go down to 10, we go down to 10. But I'm okay with her being excused.
Can you hold off before letting 4 in? No, yeah, just close the door. All right, so we'll cross that bridge if we need to tomorrow. At a minimum, you know, she's going to be here with us tomorrow. We'll see what progress we make tomorrow. Again, with a full day, what I'm hoping for is by the end of tomorrow, we have a better idea of how many more days we need. And then that lets me know how tightly I need to be hanging on to the alternate. Any input from the defendants?
No, Your Honor, I think the way you left it with the juror was appropriate, and I think that's where we should leave it today.
I agree with that.
Okay. Well, we're not out of the woods yet. Apparently number 4 wants to ask us something as well.
Oh,
All right, welcome back, Juror 4. What is it you want us to know?
We told my general manager that we would do a deal with him to get equity in the business. We told him that it would have to close before August 31st. So I just need to, I will have an hour at lunchtime every day. So I just need to be able to schedule that phone call. Is all I.
Sure. How long does phone call last?
Contract attorneys. The operating agreement, I wouldn't imagine.
Okay, so what I would ask you to do is, again, we try to build in some cushion. And so if you could tentatively schedule that for the 29th or the 30th, may not be something we need to worry about at all, but if it's just for an hour, that is something I think that we can accommodate. Maybe pack your lunch one day. We actually have a separate room you can use if you need to do that on your own. All right, just let us know which date you end up deciding. Friday would be better than Thursday.
I told my partners that I was gonna come today, and if I got selected, then we'd have to kind of go from there, and that's what my schedule looks like, so, cool.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good dogs.
All right, so is there anything else we need to take up before we break for today? Otherwise, the idea would be that just a little bit before 9, let's say we'll reconvene at about 8:55. I'll check in with everyone to see if anything happens to have come up overnight. And then as soon as all the jurors are here, we'll bring them all in and call the first witness.
to convene at what time, Your Honor?
I like to come in a little bit before 9, just so we can see if something has popped up or flared up that we need to talk through. I don't want to keep the jurors in there for, 30, 40 minutes when we told them 9 o'clock. So anything else you think we need to take up now, though?
No, Your Honor.
All right.
Housekeeping matter.
Okay. All right. What do we got?
One is, we're not starting, saying we're going to exhibits. My understanding is that we're going to buy Zoom, so they'll come up on the screen. We're going to see them, we'll be able to see them. That's just how, rather than buying it.
You certainly can bring the binders if you want. But in terms of how to show it to the jury, if you're not going to be passing them out or giving them their own copies, then we would do it over the screen. But I'm not, if you want to sit there and prepare, 13 binders for all the jurors, you're perfectly welcome to.
Just make sure that that's consistent with your expectation. It's okay to use them documents on screen and proceed in that fashion. I think that's.
Yeah, that's our standard. But like I said, it would certainly behoove you to kind of practice with the Zoom, because sometimes it can be a little temperamental in here. So we'll try to have the courtroom open as soon as we can. I'm thinking 8:30, 8:40 is usually when the deputies first arrive and start unlocking it. And so if you can be here, as soon as the courthouse opens at 8:30, that might give you some time to kind of fool around with the Zoom link, which you all, if you haven't already, you'll be emailed a copy of that link, and it'll be the same one throughout the week.
The other issue, Your Honor, is we don't know who the witnesses are tomorrow, and we'd like to know what the plaintiff is going to be called.
I respectfully decline, Your Honor.
All right. And are there any particular logistical or evidentiary issues or exhibits that you feel are going to inordinately delay things because of the lack of notice?
Well, no, it's just a matter of simple notice, where we just need to prepare, and it's going to be a lot more efficient if we know who we're preparing for. So we think the trial will feel much better
I would just say, Your Honor, he's identified 30 witnesses at both 3 trials. He said he didn't know who's available. So we literally have no idea who's going to walk in the door. I certainly don't think that's fair.
Can you give me any sort of, the procedural posture requirements, or basically, I'm not aware of any of the uniform rules or the case law or anything like that. I mean, I'd be open to something along those lines to say exactly what plaintiff should be compelled to do.
authority I can cite on the spot, Your Honor.
I don't either, Your Honor. I thought your instruction may be strong, but I thought what you had said at the pretrial was that you could probably expect that, the night before we would be given, some idea about which witnesses were going to be called. So I was hoping that was going to be true. I didn't know how Mr. Hyder would take the posture that he's not going to tell us anything until they come in the door.
Yeah, I mean, that is an evolution. Mr. Hidari is, I think, initially we talked about you just saying generally kind of a broader category, maybe breaking it down into groupings without necessarily committing to the exact order. Any particular reason for your evolution there?
I will specifically state that when I was asked, I was told, or I mentioned that I would think about it or consider it, but I never committed to disclosing anything to them. And upon further consideration, I think that it's not in my client's benefit. And so that's why I want to stand firm on that, Your Honor.
And do you have any idea of the total amount of witnesses the plaintiff intends to call at this point?
Tomorrow, I anticipate on calling. It depends how long they take, maybe 4, maybe 5.
I mean, you think we're only going to get through 4, like with a full, 7 hours of testimony?
That's what I was thinking.
Well,
Not sure.
I'll caution you that if we stop at 2 and you're out of witnesses, the plaintiff rests.
Understood, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Well,
Ask one more question.
sure.
What about Mr. Nix and Mr. Imes? Are they going to be testifying tomorrow?
I think Your Honor has inherent authority to structure a trial, would include requiring some notice and fundamental fairness.
With the Nixon Imes being the expert witnesses, I mean, I could see the
I think there's a
the
good
justification for that.
I think there's a good chance one of them will testify tomorrow. I haven't decided which one yet.
All right. Well, I think. I mean, I think at this point, I think as a matter of courtesy, Mr. Hidari is declining that, but and he has his client's interest, but I also have the jury's interest in my mind and the court's interest in my mind. So if at some point I think that this is impeding the orderly flow of things, then I may feel like I have to step in. But for now, just based on the rules and I understand them, or more so the lack thereof, I don't think I can compel him or commit him based on what we have so far of kind of laying out the game plan. So we know that, I'll say this at least then, Mr. Hidari, is that for expert witnesses, I think since those do require probably more exhibits or a more technical cross, or may potentially have a counter witness that needs to be sitting in the courtroom or something like that, that would be something I would expect you to give notice of, at least whether it's going to be in the morning or the afternoon.
If I call an expert tomorrow, it'll be in the afternoon. That's my intent.
All right. And you're essentially saying that you're reserving the right that both of those experts could be called tomorrow afternoon. All right. Anything else?
Nothing from here, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
All right, then I'll see everyone. Let's about 8:55 so we can see what else has come out, and at then we'll be at the mercy of the jurors. Thank you all. We're off the record in recess.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
And Your Honor, can we leave things in the courtroom?
That's fine.
Notice. Yeah, I noticed. Okay.